With the current state of the world, it's a great time to think about how to better protect our digital privacy. Silent Pocket makes it easy with their product line of patented Faraday bags, phone cases, and wallets, which will make your devices untrackable, unhackable, and undetectable. Visit silentpocket.com and use discount code SHAREDSECURITY to receive 15% off your order during checkout.
You're probably aware that social engineering attacks like the recent high-profile account takeovers on Twitter are costing businesses millions of dollars in direct financial losses, lost productivity, and business disruption. But what can you do about it? Well, it starts with making sure your staff are aware of how they can be targeted and exploited. That's why we're excited to announce ClickArmor's new gamified social engineering module called Fakes and Frauds. Unlike traditional training, where employees watch the same video every year and they really don't learn much, ClickArmor's game-based training offers learning quizzes, puzzles, and fun exercises that really grab people's attention and get them thinking about real-life threats that they will face in the future. Gamified learning that is visually dynamic and animated is proving to be 80% more engaging, so employees are therefore more motivated to learn defensive skills. When you can show that employees are actually learning, you get a much better return on security awareness training investment. So visit us at clickarmor.ca today to access your free trial of Fakes and Frauds Gamified Social Engineering Defense course.
Welcome to the monthly edition of the Shared Security Show, episode 103 for August 2020. And joining me is Mr. Famous Scott Wright, or
Famous?
Mr. Canada. How about Mr. Canada?
Sure, I'll take that. Yeah.
Yes. And we're also joined by special guest Kyle Lovett from my team, the Veracode penetration testing team. He's a principal pen tester, and he's here with us to discuss our new series, Scott, which was Scott's great idea, which is targeted attacks. So this is going to be a three-part series we're going to be doing, and this is the first month where we're going to focus on reconnaissance and open source intelligence.
Yeah, I think Tom and I talked a little bit about this last month that, Tom does a great job on a weekly basis of covering, the top news stories in security, putting them in context, having weird guests like Kevin Johnson and and others. And so, we can't really top that on a monthly basis. So I thought we got to go for something different. And so we'd like to start by doing a themed series, call it. And we'll see where that goes after a few episodes. But what we're going to do initially is start with targeted attacks. And, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And I know Tom and you and your team do a lot of technical penetration tests, vulnerability assessments, and quite often I'm sure you start those attacks with the human side, right? You do some reconnaissance, you do some analysis of who are the people that might be good pathways into the organization. I think that's really interesting stuff. And from my point of view as a security awareness trainer and now creator of ClickArmor, which is all about generating awareness through gamification and interaction and engagement. So I think it's a really good place to start, where we look at how do attacks really begin, how do they unfold, what's the impact, and I think you guys can probably shed a lot of light that is of general interest to people who listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I totally agree. Targeted attacks in general just get a ton of media attention, especially lately with the increase of phishing and coronavirus scams and all these things that are on the rise, and, people working from home all the time because offices are closed. It's a great time to talk about what targeted attacks are and what are some of those techniques that attackers use. And, that's why I wanted to bring Kyle on the show, because Kyle on my team, he really specializes in what we call open source intelligence gathering. And at Veracode, we've actually built a pen test service kind of around that concept of what information is out there about a customer's applications or developers. What are developers talking about when it comes to sensitive things, say in a GitHub repository where, developers might be collaborating on code, or, what might someone has posted maybe on social media that an attacker could use to gain access or to conduct social engineering attacks. And so, I wanted to bring Kyle on the show to kind of show us some of these techniques, maybe his favorite techniques that, I think maybe even some of our audience, you might be able to try at home, if you will.
I was thinking about that too. I thought it'd be great.
Yeah.
We didn't really have time to prepare that much, but if you guys could do like a screen share of a Google search, like a
Hmm.
Google hack kind of thing, you could say, I'd like to search for anybody who's, set their passwords in a stupid way, or, very general, but to see what are the common things that you guys can tell people are often overlooked by end users.
Exactly. So let me introduce Kyle. So Kyle, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Kyle, great to see you.
I'm honored that you asked me on.
Awesome. So maybe for our audience, could you maybe give a little bit overview, just a little bit of your background? And I know you've got lots of cool stories of things that you've done in the past. I know you've been on Darknet Diaries, which a lot of our listeners, know and love that podcast as well. But yeah, give our audience a little bit of overview about your background and who you are.
Sure. So I come from worked in the federal government as a contractor for many years, State Department for most, and then DoD doing security engineer work. Not so much, a little bit of pen testing, and then went to DoD and went on the red team. But I really kind of came out of the hacker closet, if you will, when I started searching and testing a lot of routers and switches, and finding a lot of bugs in IoT devices, and especially home routers, which was kind of really a big thing that blew up with lots of vulnerabilities. So I went to work for Cisco, came out to California, moved from DC, and was there for a couple of years, and then basically joined Tom's team to work more on the application security side, and that's about it.
Very
Awesome.
cool. I know you have some interesting stories. One of them, you had won a bug bounty for United Airlines.
Oh yeah.
Back in the day. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh
Bounty.
yeah, yes. So they said they were going to pay in miles for the if you get a minor bug was 50,000 miles, a medium bug was 250, and a high bug was a million. And
Wow.
so I said, I was not doing anything that Saturday, and I saw that they had started. So I took a look, and they had the parameters of what the domains were in scope, and using just some Google searches, I was able to find some targets pretty quickly. Found 2 SQL injections in 2 different applications, which I can say now because they're long since fixed. But they were pretty serious ones, and they gave me 2 million miles. I think it was like 2.5 million.
Wow.
And a bunch of other little bugs. And
So you could come up and visit me in Ottawa.
yeah, I actually gave most of the miles away. So yeah, I don't really have any more. So yeah, but my wife from St. Catharines and Sarnia, up in that area. Yeah,
awesome.
So, yeah, we definitely have to come up there sometime.
I think that's a great story. Kyle flies for free for finding bugs and.
Well, you gotta give them some credit, right? I mean, for being creative and saying, how can we incent people to help us? And for an airline, miles makes good sense.
Yeah, it was better than a free T-shirt or a hat, or
yeah.
Yeah, that's what you get nowadays for finding bugs, right? Because that was, how many years ago was that? That was
5 years ago, 6 years. Yeah, 5 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah,
And the bug bounty market has changed significantly since then.
Was that around when Kevin Mitnick was talking about starting a bug bounty market, like for selling bounty or bugs to whoever wanted to pay for them?
I think so. I think so.
So kind of come full circle to today, and in the pen tests that you conduct, what are some interesting things that you found during tests that kind of maybe surprise you, that how easy they are to find some of these things?
So yeah, I mean, one of my favorite places to look right away is GitHub, because it's without fail. People will always have, developers or engineers will use the GitHub as a place to maybe put test code or potential even source code directly from their applications. And just by doing a simple search using usually their domain as the kind of anchor in the search, been able to find entire source codes for applications with passwords and third-party passwords and API keys. In fact, I think it's about 1 in 3 or 4 that I find at least significant information just on GitHub and Stack Overflow alone, where I found social media secret auth tokens for Twitter and Facebook out there. It's crazy, and a lot of times they're not really aware when we go to let them know, and then I think that's one of the values that we bring is, they're like, oh, well, that was a whole attack vector I wasn't even thinking about. And it's not just your organization's GitHub, it's everybody that works there, because they're going to be searching for it. And they use that in targeted attackers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I was thinking, from an open source intelligence point of view, that you're going to be, when you're looking for information about a client organization that's hired you and you want to try and target them, you're going to look at the people and where the ones that are most active on social media and publishing and stuff like that. But I didn't think actually about the developers. Of course, makes sense that if the developers are freewheeling on websites or they're tinkering with code that might end up being in their actual corporate systems, that's actually a pretty big find too, right?
Well, absolutely, yeah. We found usable credentials several times. AWS secret keys, IAM, full IAM credentials. So yeah, it's quite scary. And I know GitHub is now trying to flag that sort of thing when it sees it. And there are like tools you can use to search GitHub repositories for this sort of thing, but nothing beats just doing it manually and taking a look at it, because you can really drill down into a certain user's profile who puts things in there that maybe they didn't even think was important, but yeah, it's definitely something that should be a part of each test if possible.
Yeah, the social media keys and passwords and those things are interesting to me, especially from a targeted attack perspective, because imagine the scenarios of where you're able to hijack, or an attacker is able to hijack a social media account of a company or a person or an organization. Those are one of those things like we've seen recently with the big Twitter hack, right? You could become that person to elicit, somebody to click a link, drop your Bitcoin, send it here, like we had seen. But what's interesting is a lot of these attackers are going for the quick win. Like they get access to the account and they send a tweet or they send a Facebook post and then that's it. But I think we see these dedicated attackers that probably have these credentials or these keys, and they're just sitting on them, just waiting for the right moment, or even using them, and we don't even know about it, to conduct targeted attacks.
That's very, very popular in a thing called BEC attacks, business email compromise attacks. These people will sit on, compromised email accounts or hosts for maybe months, just gathering intelligence. And they have no idea that all they're doing is just reading. They're not touching anything at first. And then, when they finally build up to that point of actually exploiting it, it comes out of the blue for most people.
So that brings up a good point, Kyle. If I was an attacker and I was, in business where I'm looking for sites that I want to hack and monetize or get some personal gain from, how long would you expect me to be spending just doing research, like the open source intelligence and scanning and reconnaissance stuff?
Well, I know the FBI just arrested one of the most prolific guys just this year or late last year. It was said that he would sit for several months, just focusing on different potential victims, or that have sort of maybe an older style business model where they're still taking invoices a certain way and
sending attachments in the emails and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then then they're looking at the CFO, the COO, the CEO. And they're looking to fish those folks, and they're going to do it through a myriad of ways, but they're going to spend dozens of literal days looking at it and to attack, and the payoff for them is huge.
Yeah.
You know, they got a company last year for $11 million.
Wow.
And you know, took 30 minutes when the actual exploit happened, right?
Yeah, that was something I noticed when people were commenting on the Twitter hack, you know, on Reddit and other places where people are saying, you know, like, how is it that these teenagers can hack with like a couple of hours of social engineering effort? But, you know, I think the bottom line is they probably spent a lot more than a couple of hours doing the research and background investigation.
Yeah, he obviously knew that there was some kind of, he must have read some chatter somewhere about maybe the internal Twitter team had a internal admin account or something. I believe it was through Slack, from what I understand, that he was able to penetrate that. You know, and once you get into internal discussions and you're able to read them, even if it is through like social media where people are just chatting with each other, or internal like Slack channel or Discord, then it becomes easier because then people start kind of talking about the pathways and certain things that they use in their job every day.
Assuming that what the channel they're talking on is actually somewhat secure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
There is that.
there is definitely that.
Cool.
Very cool. So let's talk about techniques. And you know, I wanted to ask you, since you do this every day and you see all the juicy data and information that you can find through what we call open source intelligence techniques. What are some of your favorite techniques that you like to use?
So one of the things that I like to definitely look at for folks and organizations is the DNS stuff, the domain things, and so for example, for the BEC type of compromise, oftentimes they're going to use phishing techniques to get people to go and put their credentials in, and sometimes they're going to you use a technique called subdomain takeover. Oftentimes, as you can see here, I have this program called URL Crazy that I just ran for Google, where it runs the different uh, spellings or character replacements or character swaps of the domain that you put in there. And then it goes and sees if anybody has actually done that. So like here's one for google.com, with two L's in it, you know, and so they use it as a way to put in a credential back page where people will go in and put their credentials, obviously, into an attacker's site. So this is one that's good to use. Not only does it give people a view into, hey, you know, what is this one here, or what is this particular one here, and sometimes they'll go and find, oh, there's a phishing site that I had no idea existed, that has our information on it that's using a misspelling. But also they can go and say, you know what, why don't we just spend the $100 or $200 and register some of these different character things, to do, you know, make sure that other people don't get them and use them, or at least know about them to put them on a block list, you know. So you know, this is a really, I think, a unique tool, and it's really quick, and it gives you pretty good insight into it, of what an attacker will register and use to attack.
That's cool.
This. Yeah. So another item that I like to look at is always making sure that, you know, they know what their DNS looks like on the external side of things. You know, knowing what subdomains are out there, if there's any subdomains of their main domain that are stale or they're not being used anymore, have they deregistered them and taken them offline and not had them point to certain IPs? This is important because what can happen is, say you have a developer puts up a subdomain that they're using for a test environment, and then it gets long forgotten, and you know, he takes his stuff off of it, but they never, you know, decommission it off their DNS, but it's still pointing to an IP address that is owned by some cloud environment, right? And then another tenant comes in there and gets on that cloud environment, and a lot of times they wouldn't even know that they have that DNS, that subdomain, pointing to that IP address. Now, attackers will look for that sort of thing. You know, now I have a domain that I control that's your subdomain, which can be used in a multitude of ways, including, you know, CORS attacks, or other types of cross-domain attacks. and certainly, even reputation, destroying type of attacks where they're putting up things under the name. So I always like to look, and try to find as much as I can about all the domains that we have. And a lot of that is really on the open source side of things. You can find a lot of it, kind of long gone are the days where you have to brute force all of the DNS registries out there. There's a lot out there. While I'm on the screen, there is a tool that is called DNS Recon, which I use quite often. This one, I did a recon of Windows.net, which is one of the Azure cloud environments for Microsoft, which helps you get some information about the using DNSSEC and that sort of thing. And it's just DNS Recon -D. And these are this and the URL Crazier. They're built into a Kali Linux, but I believe you could probably get it on Mac Brew and Windows as well. But there's also, there's a lot of open source, open APIs and sites that do DNS listings. So, one of the sites that I use is called ThreatCrowd, which you come and you put the domain in here, and it gives you a lot of good information about, there are known as Trojans out there and backdoors. Here's all the IPs that belong to it. Here's all the domains. And they even have a nice API. So that one is threatcrowd.org. And there are several of these different ones. So this is a good place to start. In fact, I have a script that goes and grabs all these open source APIs and pulls them in, so then I can have just a list and start to go back from there. And I'll be honest, I think in the last 10 tests I've done, at least half of them found subdomains that had been long since forgotten about. And
Wow.
And they were able to go and then shut them down. And and it could have turned ugly, if it was done differently. So ThreatCrowd is one. There's also one called HackerTarget, which also has an API background, which I use, and you can just go on their website and they have it here. They also have some other cool tools. It's like reverse DNS to see if you have a zone transfer. Always important to do a zone transfer check. It gives you a good listing. So at the beginning of an engagement, you can take the information from all these different APIs. And there's another one called DNS Dumpster, which is actually related to HackerTarget. It gives you a lot of good information about, so like this one I'm using office.com as just an example. Lot of good information about the, what is on the domain. So usually I can present, at the beginning of it, all of the subdomains I'm able to brute force or able to find through these APIs and where they resolve to. And then we take a look at them and see. Sometimes I've gone to the subdomain websites and taken a screenshot, and it's some other website or some other thing that had no idea that it was still resolving to them. So
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Kyle. So just to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying that if a company registers a subdomain at some point for some reason and then forgets about it, and that subdomain is still pointing to an IP address, and it happens to be in a cloud environment like Azure or AWS, some other company comes along and gets some space on that cloud platform, and they get that same IP address assigned to them, then the attacker will look for that entity and break into it so that it can take over people trying to go to that first subdomain. Is that the idea?
Yeah, or they'll just search for long lost subdomains that are sitting empty or vacant on certain cloud environments, and then go register that, and and try to get onto that IP.
I see. Yeah.
That's a big one as well.
Yeah.
That they try to do, and then from there they can do a lot more phishing attacks.
Yeah, because people just look at the domain, right, not the subdomains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's important to know where you were at for your subdomains and see what people are putting up in the development area, and knowing that they're out there. So it's really important on that.
Very cool.
So, another one that I really like, and it's kind of a domain and a subdomain. Well, while I'm thinking about it, I just wanted to show there is a couple of Google Chrome plugins I like, and there's one called Wmap. It was written by one of the security engineers. I think he's at Uber. you just drop a list of URLs, and it goes and takes screenshots of all the front pages of them, and it puts in a little file, and it's really helpful when you're doing recon. So if you have 500, sites that you find, you can just dump it in here. So this is a tool. It's called Wmap, and you can find it in the Chrome store, and it's really a really nice tool. It's a little difficult. Sometimes you have to start Chrome using no certificate error extension, so it ignores it, so it can take the screenshot. But besides that, it's really helpful.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, for just our audience that may not be as technically, or they don't technically understand a lot of things that you're showing.
Okay.
All these tools are, they're not actually querying like actual websites or sending like attack traffic towards it. These are all querying existing either databases or records that are just internet searchable, right?
Yep, like the DNS, all it's doing is just querying your DNS server for the different variations, just like you do when you go to a website. Your browser is going to do automatically. So no, this doesn't touch any actual site, and it doesn't put any attack packets. That's very important. Yeah,
and that is the key to open source intelligence. Is it's finding the information that is just out there on the internet someplace or on a server that we're not actually attacking an organization to get this information. It's just already out there.
That's right. Yeah, and that's an important aspect. Is at the beginning of a test, or as an attacker, you can put all this information without even touching their website, or anything, leaving any fingerprints that you were on any of those. Definitely. And
cool. So I have another question for you. If I was a business, for example, and you were finding stuff like this about my business that are makes me vulnerable to attackers, what part of the business would be concerned about it and trying to clean it up? Like, is it security operations or IT operations, or who would you say needs to take action on these things?
Well, it really depends on what it is. Like, so if I find the GitHub, like one of the developers put the items on the repository, obviously that's going to be security, because they're going to need to go to the individual to take down and then they're going to have to do a threat analysis of what was leaked out there. But yeah, some of this for like the DNS things, it's going to be a combination of the IT and the security. There's a lot of times that there are phishing sites found, so you're going to have a security and threat analysis for that. But also, hey, we need a process in place so when these new domains come out and they're done with, or subdomains, that there's a process to decommission them correctly and take them off the register and make sure that they're no longer pointing or in the environment at all.
Cool.
So yeah, it's absolutely a partnership between the security and the IT team. I think. I mean, from what I've seen.
Nice.
And now a word from our sponsor, Edgewise Networks. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved are flat networks in cloud and data centers, with unprotected attack paths that allow threats to move laterally to cause data breaches. But microsegmentation using network addresses is complicated and takes too much time. But there's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable. At the core of Edgewise Auto Segmentation is Zero Trust Identity, which allows workloads to communicate only after their software identity has been verified. Malicious or unimproved software is no longer allowed to communicate. Identity-based protection provides more coverage with fewer policies to make Edgewise simple to deploy and manage. No changes to the application or network are required. One solution protects virtual machines and containers in the cloud and on-premises. To stop lateral threat movement and prevent breaches, visit edgewise.net for a demo and to see results within minutes.
Yeah, so maybe talk a little bit about a targeted attack from a user perspective, and maybe even phishing, right? I'm thinking of a scenario where someone specifically, like say a CEO or a CFO or somebody in an organization, is being targeted. What types of techniques would you use to find information that would be valuable to an attacker in, say, a phishing attack targeting a high-level executive?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the first thing that usually happens from an attacker in that is they try to map out the senior leadership and those people in important positions, and they do that through several different techniques. It'll start by just trying to find a list of users through the email searches or through searches through LinkedIn. I have one here. It's called the Harvester, which does a good job. Yeah, it's a great tool. So like here's one for just where I did a harvesting for a couple hundred results from LinkedIn, and you can find a lot of the information directly. Here, and it'll go and get email addresses. There's a lot of different uses to the harvester, and it searches a lot of different parameters. There's also another one called Hunter.io, which is a good one that does have a subscription one, but it's also a nice one to go and find email addresses of the different organizations for that. Another thing that you can do is in Google, let me find here. So you can go, sorry, here. Yeah. So like here's a good, using the switches in Google, you can search for things like in LinkedIn that can help you look for these sort of things. Like this one I would do site and then :linkedin.com and then works at Microsoft in quotes. And then I can come here and start to get a pretty good idea of who works at Microsoft or who did work at Microsoft or
wow.
And this is and then of course a lot of them have phony LinkedIn profiles and they'll even try to friend a lot of the people, and they'll make it very tempting, like I'm a headhunter looking for a really high dollar talent or
Robin Sage back in the day.
Yeah. And so once they can map out the organization, then they're going to try to start phishing, and they're going to start to look for things that they can get people to click on that are going to get them to visit a site. And that really can go even further into very detailed social engineering attacks where you're looking at their Twitter and their Facebook and public posts and their private email address and what are the things they're posting on forums and what's interesting in them. And they will go that distance if you're a CFO or your CEO, because at the end of the day, especially like in these BEC attacks, the ultimate goal is to compromise the email if they're not going to try to spoof it, and do things like send an email from the CEO to the CFO and to accounting, using a fake invoice that looks like a real invoice, pointing to their banking routing numbers, and and then going in and turning off all the alerts so the CEO doesn't see any replies back, and hoping they get paid off that way. And that's one of the common attacks. So so you're going to find a lot of information by doing sort of thing like this, but it's more than just LinkedIn. You can go to Twitter, you could do site twitter.com, you can do Facebook. There's anything imaginable. You can do site, and then things that you can look to find more information about what these people do and where they work at, and then kind of map it out from there.
I remember years ago, you used to be able to find stuff on anonymous FTP servers for different companies. They might have draft deals or partnerships, with organizations. You can literally just go to people's FTP sites and see, what look like sensitive agreements. Is that kind of thing still available, or has it pretty much been locked down now?
I don't know. It's not, obviously, that would be a great thing to look at. And you're right. One of the things they're looking for are actual, they want to know what a company's vendors are, legitimate vendors, and they want to get actual invoices, and they want to see what those invoices are so they can spoof them to right down to the font on them. So they're going to search things like, if you have an FTP server where people can drop their invoices or make payments, or they'll even spoof or try to fish out of their vendors, like just, hey, can you send me this invoice again? Or something like that. But yeah,
wow.
Yeah, definitely open FTP servers are going to be something that's going to be targeted, I think.
Nice.
So, you see all this data all the time, and, shockingly, I know we all talk on the team about, I can't believe we found this and, this and that. It's just like we kind of shake our heads. Or like, what is going on? But, what is your advice, I guess, to, people in organizations, because you're so kind of immersed in this almost, every day, what are some of the quick tips that you can give people to, secure this information better, or how can they maybe reduce their social profile, if you will? I mean, what are the things that come to mind for you on how people can defend against this type of reconnaissance? And
But the reconnaissance is always treat. I mean, I always tell this to my wife and everybody else. Anything you put on the internet, even if it's in a private forum or Facebook, you have to treat it like it's public, because it really is. Maybe it doesn't leak out, maybe it does. But once you put it out there electronically, you might as well consider, one, it's public, two, it's forever. So putting that sort of thing out there, you need to maybe think a little bit about making sure you really separate, if you're going to go onto a forum about cars, or something, that you want to separate your business and your even name, and just have like an email dedicated, or a user that you can't really tie back to it, sort of thing. And also not discussing business things as much as possible over any kind of social media. I know that's difficult sometimes, but certainly it's worth a try. For organizations, again, making sure your DNS is locked down and knowing where your threats exist. Are there any phishing sites out there for you? Taking a look at logs. Are anyone trying to brute force any passwords or do credential stuffing attacks? Noticing where they're looking at, where they can put 2FA on anything where people can access the environments, especially mail, from the outside world, and having that two-factor authentication, which even if it's a SIM card, which has its own problems, SMS, it's definitely a way to prevent, or at least help prevent these kinds of stuffing attacks. Or reuse passwords as another one. So you can go online and search your email and find if your email has been compromised, and then if the password's been compromised. And there's several services that do that, and that's a big one too. On the darknet, you can go and purchase credentials for someone, and that's why, like, for big businesses and C-level type of people, the people in the darknet charge a lot of money to give those credentials when they're still usable over to these type of attackers for these.
So do you have open source tools you can use to tell if somebody's executives or any employees have been hacked to the point where their credentials are for sale on the darknet?
Honestly, I use the great site Have I Been Pwned as the main one, and they have an API too. But there's some other sites out there that do that, and then of course there's some people that built some special tools to search the darknet, and a lot of those can be found through these credential database type of APIs. But Have I Been Pwned is probably one of the better ones if you get to their service that they use. And not only can you find out if a password's been used, compromised, but you can find out if passwords have been in dumps. So you can take a password and send a SHA-1 hash to and it'll bring it back and say, yeah, that one's been in a dump. So it's certainly very useful to know how to do that and where to look for that sort of thing.
Excellent. What percentage of businesses would you say are now using multi-factor authentication for things like webmail?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It's certainly, I think, hit or miss. But
it needs to be more.
It needs to be more. Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny because I do some consulting occasionally, and I've seen most of the places that I deal with have two-factor on their webmail, but just wondering if it's that common normally.
We see it, you know, sometimes, but yeah, we also see where it's not being used and it should be, and not just for like webmail, but like admin portals or you know, HR portals or that sort of thing, where it really should be kind of two factors.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
that's
what about like cyber physical? I assume that people would, or attackers would use Showdown or something like that to scan for devices on the internet that aren't necessarily used by end users but are vulnerable. Do they show up in many of your engagements?
Sure. I have Showdown is one that I use often, and I love it. And you know, the guy that created me really did a great job of putting together a really nice website. And so there's a lot of, just like Google, Showdown has search tag parameters. Like this one I have is a host name. Hopefully you can see that for yahoo.com, just using it as an example. And you know, not only can you see, you know, the different services, sometimes you start to see SMTP services. So you can do this for an organization. And the first thing I'm going to do with an SMTP is I'm going to check it for open relays. You know, if it's got an open relay, then you know, all right. You know, and so you know, you're looking for VMware ports, open SSL, anything that you can go and put a password in that doesn't necessarily need two-factor authentication as well. So yeah, Showdown. They also have an API and a command line API that you can get all this information to. I like to use the website as much as the command line. But you can go through, and if you have an organization, you can use this tool to kind of look and see what's out there as well. And this is where a lot of times they'll see that they'll have something that's like a host name pointing to like a IP that's in a country that they have no idea. And they can find, oh, wow, there's something pointing to an IP that isn't ours, that it's an old domain.
Wow. So are the things that you find most useful from your point of view on Showdown, are they things like the SMTP relays, or are there other kinds of appliances or services that you find useful?
Yeah, so a lot of the ones that you know, it searches for over, I think, 1,000 different services, but things like Elasticsearch, MongoDB, that are notoriously leaky sort of things where you need to lock them down. Can be found on there. You know, you're looking for, you can find Telnet, FTP, anonymous login, FTPs, easily. You can search for that. You know, you could do like you come here, and I don't know if it'd be like port 21, 21, and then an anonymous, you know, anonymous allowed or something like that. But yeah, you know, absolutely. So no anonymous allowed, anonymous allowed. Yeah, so you're looking for all the services. Now, again, this is not touching anything. This is what Showdown has already scanned for you. So again, this is something that's public and out there, right? So it's definitely an interesting tool, a good tool.
And you had an interesting story about some webcams a couple months ago, didn't you? That you were finding in Showdown.
Yeah, there are some webcams that are using default passwords, and you know, I've been struggling whether or not to like, there's a guest account on these particular webcams, and many times that the firmware that's used, it's created by the same Chinese vendor, but it's used by like 20 or 30 different camera companies. They don't even have a place where you can change the guest access, so people can go in there and look at it. But my fear is, if I public with it and, you know, struggling, is people started, you know, using it and abusing it.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, well over 150,000 open webcams like that could be abused, and it has two-way audio too. So
so let's address one of those crazy questions that you get from people who haven't had a chance to think too much about security and how we all work in this industry, and that is, why are we publishing all this information that bad guys could use to break into things?
Well, it's a good question, because this information is already could be published by them. You could run basic tools, even just Nmap alone, you can get the same information. In fact, most people would probably, when they're targeting, use their own tools to you know, supplement this stuff. I think the idea here is to be more transparent about what is out there, and to really let people know, hey, just because you're sitting at your house doesn't mean that, you don't have a router that has a open admin portal to the internet. It's right there. Anyone can get to it. A lot of people have no idea that their webcam has an internet access portal, or their NAS device, that sort of thing. And the same thing with businesses. They forget that their Elasticsearch might be out there. And so this is just really showing, what is already out there. It's nothing that couldn't be found from public sources or direct reconnaissance anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the whole idea of responsible disclosure and bug publication and things like that. I think are things that we have to get people to understand better. Why we think it's better to expose the vulnerabilities publicly, as soon as possible, so everybody's aware of what risks we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other piece of that too is the argument of to your point, Scott, about these hacker tools are out there. This is making the problem worse. But the fact is that attackers already have this data. In fact, all these tools like Showdown and others, like we're actually behind. Like if you think about it, like attackers are always one step ahead of the good guys. So when we create tools like these and contribute projects and tools to the security community, we're actually making the situation better by giving the good guys at least something and tools that stay on par with the attackers.
Yeah, and the way I look at it too is if you can imagine that a good guy can build something that's so powerful it can scan the entire internet for open devices, there's chances are several bad guys have done it already, right?
And they're adding a little bit to it, like looking for quick vulnerabilities, scanning for like the F5 vulnerability. They're looking for, they can do the directory traversal, and which the Showdown obviously doesn't do, but and they're looking to exploit it right away, and using tools to brute force and such.
Awesome.
Well, this is great stuff, Kyle. Thank you so much for the demo and sharing your insights and some of the techniques that you use on your pen tests, as well as real attackers. Where can our listeners find out more about you and what you've been up to?
I guess just my Twitter account, just the Squirrel Buddha is my Twitter account. I post a little bit about security and follow a lot of security stuff. You'll see a lot about wildfires right now. There's actually 2 wildfires within 10 miles of us, and everything is covered in ash around here. So,
it's crazy.
California.
Yeah. Stay safe. It's air quality is probably gonna be really bad right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very bad actually. Yeah, so we close all the windows, but
yeah. All right. Well,
thanks very much, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
A great job, so I really enjoy listening to it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, everyone. Well, we'll see you next month for the second edition, our second show on targeted attacks. So stay tuned for that. But make sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. But till then, we'll see you next time.